Dr. Carlton Fredericks is our Talkback guest of the morning. Recently in our area, in conjunction with a meeting on health and nutrition at the Augusta Civic Center, the name of Dr. Fredericks, well known to radio and television audiences and throughout the Northeast, was heralded as a principal speaker at this particular affair. His newest book, Eating Right for You, is currently in bookstores and on newsstands, and if I'm to believe what the publishers say, it's apt to have a blockbuster sale when compared to his other contributions in literary form, which have already experienced fabulous success. Today we're to learn more about the philosophy which Dr. Fredericks espouses, and we invite you to stand by. Since our program was pre-taped, the usual ability to call in with question or comment cannot apply. However, I'm sure you'll find the discussion provocative and enlightening in its many avenues of dialogue. In just a moment, Dr. Fredericks and nutrition and better health. For now, our usual pause at the top of the program as we make way for other matters. Dr. Carlton Fredericks, our guest of the morning, in addition to his newest book, Eating Right for You, published by Grosset and Dunlap, has written several other books on nutrition which have sold over 1 million copies. His book, Low Blood Sugar in You, has sold over 300,000 copies alone. And for years, the lives of millions of Americans have been affected through his syndication in radio form on the air. And with these and many other credentials, it's our pleasure to welcome him to our forum this morning. In spite of the constantly rising costs of food today, is it possible for people to affect a better and more healthful eating style and at the same time keep within those costs that are so-called, quote, reasonable, unquote?
Well, of course, my viewpoint is that good food is always less expensive than medication. And the only food that's really costly is something that doesn't support your health. Of course, your question reminds me of the young man who wrote to a minister in Augusta and said, I'm coming into town. I have $25 a week income. Can I lead a good Christian life on $25? And the minister wrote back and said, that's about all you can do. And in today's food market, with the seasoning of knowing what she's doing, which is a rather rare spice in the housewife's habits, it is possible to cope with rising costs, but what the housewife has to do almost literally is to observe what the average American housewife does and do the opposite.
And what does the average housewife do? She loads up a market basket when she goes shopping. That's one thing she does.
Well, more than this. You know, we tell her, don't go shopping when you're hungry. You buy much more on impulse when you're hungry. And don't send your husband in. The husband always buys much more than the wife does on impulse. We say to her, don't try to compensate for missing foods or foods which have been priced out of the market, vis-a-vis meat, for instance, by using starch. You're not extending, you're diluting.
Uh-huh.
Which is to say, the housewife who regards macaroni and cheese as a substitute for a piece of steak is not feeding her family as well as she thinks she is, because it's true macaroni runs 13% protein. It's also true that meat runs much higher. The housewife who thinks that soy is a substitute for meat. Well, the soy industry has done a good public relations job, but the scientific fact of the matter is that while soy is very remarkable for a vegetable protein, it is not equivalent to meat and fish and fowl and eggs and cheese and milk. So what we ask the housewife to do is to revise her shopping criteria and start by buying no fractionated foods. Now, by a fractionated food, I mean, well, let's take two illustrations. The bread counter and the meat counter would be perfect illustrations. She buys white bread. The average housewife buys it by punching it, and if her arm disappears up to the elbow, that's the bread for her. It doesn't require any chewing, so that 20 years later she can buy a water massage machine, you see, to try to tighten the teeth that loosened up because she didn't give them any exercise.
Mm-hmm.
The bran that is taken out of the bread she buys separately to cure the constipation she gets from the bread without the bran in it. The wheat germ she buys separately to cure the nervousness which comes with lack of vitamin B complex in her bread. So we'd like her to stop that and sensibly buy whole wheat bread and get it all together in today's phrase. We'd like her to buy whole grain cereals, but when she buys the cereals, we want her to watch for certain additives which are present in our food products, which have been banned in a half dozen European countries because they're toxic or they're teratogenic, they deform the unborn young, or they're even carcinogenic, and we've got a lot of those on the shelves. Cereals with BHA and BHT I would not feed to an animal except as an unchristian act.
Well, the challenge is really being hurled in the housewife's direction. If she goes out to buy, she's going to be somewhat of an expert in recognizing all of these pitfalls that are facing her.
Well, you see, that is exactly the point. She is faced with a tremendous challenge. The challenge is that she has in her hands one of the very few environmental factors conducive to good health, or to bad, depending on your choice. She has one of the very few factors she can control. She can't, as an individual, do much about air pollution or water pollution or whatever, but she can about her food. Now, if she goes in and buys on the basis of the criteria the average woman uses, she must come out badly. By that I mean this. If I stop an Augusta housewife on her way out of the supermarket and point to the items in her basket and say to her, "Why did you buy that, and that?" I'll tell you what answers I'm going to get. "It was on sale. It's only seasonally available, so I buy it when I can. It comes in such a pretty reused container, for which she's only paying 5 times the actual cost.
Packaging.
I buy it because my child likes it. That's why her child has 8 cavities in his mouth. I buy it because it's on my husband's ulcer diet. I bought it on impulse. Or I don't know why I bought it. Or we always serve this on Tuesday night. Or this is what my mother-in-law always gave my husband, and I like to keep up the family tradition of arthritis." Now, nowhere in that list is there the simple recognition of one fundamental principle which should be guiding her buying. I bought this because my family's well-being requires it. That's the one.
Basic.
That's the one answer we don't get. Now I say to her, "You have a cereal here with butyl hydroxytoluene in it. Loyola University School of Medicine recommended to the FDA that this particular additive be retired from the market because it alters the behavior of animals in a way resembling what happens to hyperactive children. And hyperactive children, it has been demonstrated, there was a paper on this before the AMA, lose some of their hyperactivity or all of it if the additives are taken out of the diet. Now, why are you buying something with butyl hydroxytoluene? Answer, I don't read labels. And if I did read them, I wouldn't know what those long names mean. To which my answer is, take my good friend Adele Davis's axiom, which is a little oversimplified, but if you can't pronounce it, don't buy it, and don't swallow it. Now, we started on fractionated. I'd like to go over to the meat counter for a moment, because the American housewife's behavior at the meat counter is what gives butchers ulcers. The butcher has to buy a 500 or 600 pound carcass. I'm a consultant to the meat business, and I know what I'm talking about. Now, he has to buy it from nose to tail. He can't fractionate, and he's got to sell it all. The housewife comes along and concentrates her buying on 12 or 14 popular cuts. It is her concept that an animal is made up of T-bone, porterhouse, sirloin, rib roast, ground chuck, filet mignon if she's flush, and that's it. How the animal functions without its innards, she never stops to think, and she doesn't buy them. Now, the butcher has that stuff lying there in the showcase, and he must get rid of it to get his money out. Either that, or he must charge you 5 times what the other cuts are worth. So by the law of supply and demand, she drives up the price of what she considers to be the desirable cut because she's bidding against her neighbor for it. And the other stuff lying in the showcase, which is equally nutritious and sometimes more so, is underpriced because the butcher is trying to get some trade in that direction. I'm trying to say that the American housewife has a tradition. If she serves liver at all, she serves it once a week. It is as if there's an unwritten law that she'll go to jail if she serves it twice a week. The portion of liver, which gives her family 30 or 40,000 units of vitamin A, and a lot of B complex, and a lot of valuable minerals, that's lying there, and it's cheap. Added to that, the cheapest form of liver is the best. The calf's liver with cheap prizes has the least value. Beef liver has more because the animal has lived longer and has had a chance to pile up some reserves in its liver, which the calf didn't have. Pork liver is better than beef liver. Lamb liver is almost as good as pork liver, and if you want to, out of curiosity, walk into a butcher shop, you'll find those two priced all the way down because the housewife doesn't want them. Kidneys, brain, sweetbread, which is actually thymus rather than pancreas, which is what the public thinks it is. Now, let me say something important about that group of foods. Among the primitives who eat the animal from nose to tail, the incidence of degenerative disease and the incidence of cancer of many types is far below ours. It rises as soon as we send a supermarket into the area. This is an unchristian act. So Instead of doing what we are doing now, I'm asking the housewife not to practice crisis medicine to which she is lending herself, but to use preventive nutrition. May I explain that?
Go ahead, yes.
I was on the platform in Kansas City at the Academy of Preventive Medicine. A psychiatrist, that's a psychologist with a bad neurosis, was on the platform when suddenly he got a heart attack while he was speaking. There were 7 cardiologists in the audience, which gave him a chance to be bumped off with great efficiency.
Yes.
So they took him upstairs, and a few minutes later he is lying more comfortably, and an hour later he's almost back to normal. One of the cardiologists said to him, Hank, what was the first symptom of your heart attack? Meaning while he was standing on the platform. And he told about the distribution of pain and shortness of breath, etc. Standing next to me was Dr. Churaskin of the University of Alabama, who was a well-known medical nutritionist. And in my ear, quietly, he said, what a ridiculous answer. He said the first symptom of that heart attack was not an hour ago. It was 7 years ago, or 8, or 10, when suddenly he found himself waking up in the morning more tired than he was when he went to bed, when he faced the day not as a challenge, but as a responsibility he'd like to duck, when he began to catch too many colds. He lost his sense of humor. He became irritable.
Warning signals. Huh?
Yes, but he said, we don't pay any attention to warning signals because medicine must be able to put a name on a condition, and you can't put a name on being tired. You have to wait until you get the pain under the rib cage, and we can put the name on it, coronary thrombosis, and then it deserves attention. That's crisis medicine. Now, what's happening is, and I'm going to put this in terms the housewife, I think, can apply. If you take your husband to a physician, say tomorrow, and the doctor says to you after testing him, he's diabetic, which could be the answer for 1 out of every 4 men over the age of 55. That's the way the tide is running. At that point, you, madam, are going to say to the doctor as your very first question, what should I feed him? See, you're practicing crisis medicine because the time to ask that question is now, not tomorrow.
Before.
Of course, and the first thing the doctor's going to say to her is, well, of course, you must take him off sugar. Well, now, at the present time, your average listener is feeding her family a teaspoon and a third of sugar every 35 minutes, 24 hours a day, which is incredible. And it's responsible for some diabetes and for low blood sugar, the opposite condition, and for hardening of the arteries and heart attacks, which are being mistakenly blamed on cholesterol.
This has been one of the big focal points in all of your direction to people, hasn't it? Sugar.
Well, I became aware in 1941 that we had gone from the time of George Washington to the present time, we have gone from a per capita intake of sugar of 12 pounds a year up to a per capita intake as high as 125. That's an awful intake of a condiment. You see, sugar isn't a food. If you make a case for sugar being a food, then rye whiskey is a food. And at least with the rye, you wouldn't give a darn. So, at any rate, we're asking her to do now what she will voluntarily, what she will do under duress when the disaster strikes. At that point, if I say to her, and she'll come to me anxiously at a lecture or a meeting or a seminar and in the classroom, what vitamins will help my husband? He's got elevated blood sugar. All right, I say to her, read Susskind on carbohydrate metabolism. Susskind says that's a standard textbook. When man broke the relationship between vitamin B complex and carbohydrate with food processing, he opened up a Pandora's box full of troubles. I'm suggesting slam the box shut now. Don't wait until he gets the diabetes.
Good point.
I think so. I think this is contaminated with too much sense to become popular.
Let me remind our listeners that we're on tape this morning. Dr. Carlton Fredericks is our Talkback guest of the day, having stopped by our studios after a recent appearance in the Augusta area. We'll effect our usual midway pause in the show, and we'll be back in just a moment. Dr. Carlton Fredericks, our Talkback guest of the morning. Dr. Fredericks, well-known nutritionist, well-known to radio, television audiences, an author. Your newest book, Eating Right for You, right on the table right here. Very interesting. I thought one of the things about your book that, and I haven't had a chance to read it all, was the fact that you start there for people who have problems with regards to the whole area of dieting, reduction of weight. This is one of the big things of today, is it not?
It's not only one of the big things of today, but it represents the particular area in which both medicine and nutrition have probably the worst batting average. And the reason for that is that, well, first of all, the medical profession has clung rigorously to the idea that the only way to lose weight is to cut calories. And that simply isn't true. For some people, the only way to lose weight is to stop storing salt. And what makes them store salt is eating starch or sugar. You see, things in diet are tied together. These people must be on a low-carbohydrate diet. Well, the AMA has condemned a low-carbohydrate diet, which means automatically it's worth looking into. This despite the fact that the AMA published the low-carbohydrate diet in their own journal and recommended it as a new way to approach obesity. They don't let the left hand know what the right hand's doing. And the low-carbohydrate diet is actually, this amuses me because I've heard it called a modern fad. Actually, when you stop and think about it, the caveman did not have Goofies, the cereal that whistles at you from the plate but doesn't feed you. He didn't have cakes and cookies and tarts and pie and bread and spaghetti and macaroni and morning cereals because they weren't available until agriculture was invented. So the caveman was on a low-carbohydrate diet. He had to be. When he found carbohydrate, it was a happenstance. So nature created, by survival of the fittest, a type of man who could keep his blood sugar up on small amounts of carbohydrate. Well, that gene is still with us in a lot of people, and we call it pre-diabetes. Of course, who is a diabetic? He's a man who can keep his blood sugar up on very little carbohydrate. Now, these people, when they eat 175 pounds of cereals, grains, and flour a year, and 120 some odd pounds of sugar, store salt. When they store salt, they store water. Now you come along and try to reduce them. Reducing is burning fat into water. If you hang on to the water, friend, you wind up where you started. So they come back to the doctor and say, I didn't lose weight on your diet. The doctor says, if you don't lose weight on my 1,200 calorie diet, you must be cheating. They're not cheating. It's their physiology that's cheating.
Isn't this one of the discouraging factors for someone who enters onto a dieting program too? Never lose, I keep doing everything that is told that I should do.
And they're told they cheat. Well, the best answer to it then is that instead of regarding, this is the basic error to which I addressed Eating Right for You. You cannot regard all patients with a disease, a given disease, as having the same disease or as being the same people.
We're all individuals.
Well, the physician recognizes it when he writes a prescription. He says to you, don't you take your wife's medicine just because you have the same symptoms. Even if it's the same disease, which it may not be, you're a different person. Then he comes along and says, everybody in America needs 5,000 units of vitamin A a day. Now, you have in Augusta a client of mine, Lipman's, the chicken operation. Yeah. And Lipman's will tell you, or any chicken breeder will tell you, you turn chickens out on the same ration, chickens of the same heredity, same physical environment, and on the same food, you're going to get survivors and non-survivors. You're going to get slow growers, medium growers, and fast growers. And I submit that we chickens ain't no different.
We basically all have the qualities of the inbuilt
variation
facilities and so forth of the chicken. I want to ask you something. This is jumping away from some of the main thoughts here, but I had a call from one of the listeners who recognized the fact that you were coming to Augusta and we were going to be doing a show with you. And her question was, will you ask Dr. Fredericks when he comes in if he has that recipe which his wife has given in the matter of cookies with wheat germ?
Yes, I do, but I don't have it off the top of my head.
Can you send it to me if you haven't got it? Because they wanted to make this as the possibility that we could distribute it to some of the people in the area.
As a matter of fact, I'd like to see cookies with that recipe go into your school program instead of the sugar-filled monstrosities they're now getting. You see, this is where we teach people to eat sugar. We offer it as a reward. The lollipop in the sky, the candy box reward, or the cookies coated with sugar. I'm bringing out a new edition of my cookbook. I just revised it, and it's coming out in the spring. And Betty's Cookies, Betty is the woman who had the temerity to marry a nutritionist and try to feed him, and has paid a bitter price ever since, because she went into a supermarket the other day, and the manager didn't know who she is, and she asked him for where the wheat germ was. She couldn't find it, and a couple of other things that we use. And he said, are you listening to that nut too? He said, my wife is driving me up a wall. And she said yes, 24 hours a day, and he hasn't figured out yet why she said that. Yes, I'll be very glad to send the recipe to you. I must make a note to do that. This is the way, and I want to make a very important point here. This is the way you alter the dietary habits of your family. You don't make a head-on attack. You don't abruptly change everything
You're
drastically.
subtle, huh?
Well, you have to be, because if you say to the American husband, eat this, it's good for you, that's an automatic challenge to reject it.
Red
Because,
flag.
well, now let me explain the psychology. Have we got time?
Oh, sure. Okay.
The American man regards taking care of yourself, which means good nutrition, among other things, taking care of yourself as a feminine activity. The woman goes in for checkups. The man takes his car in for checkups. Now, he has doubts about his masculinity. That's one of the problems of our culture. He always has to prove he's a virile, masculine man. So if you ask him to do something feminine, like taking care of himself, it's a collision. It arouses his anxiety. So you say to him at the door, it's snowing, put on your galoshes. No, he's masculine. Doesn't need them. 3 days later, he's in bed with the flu or whatever, having disregarded your good advice. Now, if you tell him, the doctor says that if you eat caviar on powdered butterfly wings, it'll be therapeutic, he'll accept it, because now he's lying down, he's sick, it's a therapeutic situation. He's not taking it preventively. You see? So you don't change the diet head on. You don't suddenly put whole wheat bread on the table. You bake the Cornell loaf of bread yourself at home. And let me advise you, women, that the odor of something baking fresh will keep a wandering husband at home more effectively than Chanel No. 5, and I know what I'm talking about. Second, you never put anything on the table and say to him, eat this, it's good for you. The minute you say that, he's got to reject it. And then the children follow, because the husband's nothing but a grown-up child. They follow the pattern.
Oh, sure.
This is one of the reasons for giving vitamin supplements. You're not challenging head-on. You're simply saying, this is an adjunct to the diet, and I don't know whether it'll do any good or not, but it's kind of an insurance policy. A husband will buy an insurance policy, but not something that's good for him. Incidentally, it's kind of intriguing, isn't it, with all this? If the husband smokes or if the husband drinks, and we are buying $14 billion worth of liquor and tobacco a year, there is no comment from the government. The FDA doesn't say anything about liquor or tobacco, but is very exercised about the use of vitamin supplements. That appears to be the clear and present danger.
Isn't that an interesting comment? Incidentally, speaking about vitamins, I want to come to, there's been such a great furor in the regards to the use of vitamin E. Now, I know this is everybody's going in that direction. I suppose it's supposed to make you more virile. It
doesn't.
It
is not the middle letter in the word sex. It has a lot of other functions.
You want to comment on that?
Well, I've been taking vitamin E since 1938. And over the years, it has given me some dividends. But my reasons for taking it have nothing to do with its being an aphrodisiac or whatever. The only aphrodisiac I know of is a good-looking blonde and a bottle of scotch. And you can't buy those on prescription, unfortunately. To come back, this story about vitamin E always begins with the question, should the public be taking it? Let me begin with another question. Why doesn't somebody do something about the fact that the vitamin E is removed from 50% of the foods in the average market basket? See, nobody brings that up. When you take the germ of a grain out, that's like the yolk of an egg. That's where the new life starts. Now, all the good nutrients are in there. They're concentrated there. That's why wheat germ is a good food. So is corn germ, rye germ, etc. When you take those out, you are taking out the vitamin E. Nobody talks about that. They all talk in the other direction. Why should you be taking vitamin E? Well, I'll give you a fast answer. This is 1 out of 1,000. Because you can give a 2-hour discussion of vitamin E and just touch the highlights. We are at the present time sitting in a building which probably has a metal frame. Girders. The girders are splashing cosmic irradiation. I can tell you that this is so. If I raise rats under a thick lead roof, they have less cancer than rats raised in the open. So we're all being irradiated. That irradiation attacks fats in the cell. If the attack happens to be pointed enough and direct enough, a remarkable chemical change takes place which deforms the normal chemistry of the cell, and what you wind up with is what we used to call in a coal furnace a clinker. Coal which still has potential usefulness, but it's wrapped up in ashes and the furnace can't get at it, it can't burn it. Well, the cell in the body becomes a clinker. Now, lest you regard this as academic, you have lost, in the last 10 years, 1/6 of 1% of the volume of your heart cells alone by this process. So nobody's immune. Now, the protection against this is a group of antioxidants, because what's really being released in the cell is an abnormal oxygen chemistry, as by virtue or by vice of this irradiation. In other words, oxygen is our friend, but oxygen can become hostile. We breathe with oxygen, but it makes iron rusty. You see?
Right.
All right. The antioxidants are vitamin E, which is a prime one, selenium, which you get from things like whole grains and brewer's yeast, high-quality protein, which is why I don't want the macaroni substituted for the meat, and vitamin C. And the FDA is proposing a series of regulations which, for a decent intake of these factors in concentrated form, will require that you get a prescription. No prescription for the whiskey. But if the alcoholic wants to take high-potency vitamins to try to help himself, which he may, he will need an RX. Yeah. And I came into Augusta because I object to this. I think FDA priorities are not only mixed up, I think they're chaotic. I think they're obscene. Because the clear and present danger, they talk about vitamin A toxicity. You heard that?
Mm-hmm.
Salt is much more toxic than vitamin A. You have to multiply the dose of vitamin A by a factor of about 100 to arrive at a toxic dose. On salt, you only have to multiply by 11. What I'm saying is the amount of salt used by a 110-pound woman, if multiplied by 11, would kill her. Nobody asks for a toxic label on salt, but FDA is asking for a toxic label on vitamin A.
Isn't that an interesting thing? But isn't this is kind of a governmental outlook that seems to be straying in a direction. We put great emphasis on certain things, other things we ignore.
Well, when I testified in Washington before the Rogers Committee, of which your Peter Kairos is a member, and incidentally, Peter Kairos is voting for the Hosmer bill, which says to FDA, keep your cotton-picking fingers off our vitamins and go fuss with the dangerous drugs, the additives, the other things you should be doing. When I testified before the committee, I said exactly that. When FDA complained that they didn't have manpower to inspect soup plants to avoid botulinus, remember that case of botulinus poisoning in a can of soup? They raided 1,400 health food stores during that period.
That's an interesting comment. Dr. Fredericks, we've come to the end of our time. It's been a delightful discussion. I'm most pleased having you on our Talkback show. I'll expect that recipe of your wife's having to do with wheat germ and cookies.
You'll get it.
Thank you very much, and good luck to you.
Thank you very much.